Welcome back, everyone, to another Market Conversations. I'm Jerry Hall, and as you hear in the background, the Escuela de Los Angeles, my local church, ringing the new hour in. We have an incredible show for you tonight. I want to quickly go through this. Hi, Lance. Hello, Jungle Inc. Bill Gould. Want to say thank you to Jungle for the $4.99 super chat. It's a great reminder to me to let you folks know that in the description of all my videos are affiliate links. Now, these affiliate links have two purposes. One, to provide some really decent services to the people in the crypto industry, i.e. TaxBit, iTrustCapital, links to Coinbase and Bitrue, etc., Unstoppable Domains. These are all good, solid entities in which I'm involved with personally, and therefore I have my affiliate links below. But also want to let you know, when you use my links, when you watch the Jerry V Hall YouTube channel and create ad revenue for the channel, as well as super special things like what Jungle did, putting a super chat in the live streams, you are adding to a financial capital pool that will be deployed to create financial literacy content. And I want to thank each and every one of you because you're all contributing to that. The hope and goal and intent is to create content so that the uninformed can become informed and utilize these technologies to increase their quote unquote wealth base. I think it's really, really important, because these kind of things are not happening in schools. We're not getting financial literacy classes in junior high school, junior college, state university level. They're really held primarily to your Harvards, Stanfords, etc. And we all don't have access to that, but we all have access to YouTube. And that is the great playing field level for all. Just got to type in a search in the field. So I want to get ready for the show tonight. I have a great guest. It's Nick Black is returning. We had Nick on last week, and we talked about some investor tools, looking at yourself as an investor and really being honest in your analysis of where you are, right? Great stream. Britta came in with some great questions at the end. But tonight's focus is really going to be about giving you some tools to look beyond yourself. I'm talking about, like, where do you start, really, right? Where would you take your 10-year-old to? And I think that's really an important factor that we all should take into account. We almost subconsciously have many of these quote unquote tools, but are unable to really effectively articulate them to others. So I'd like you to kind of put on your glasses and think to yourself, how can you utilize these tools and then be able to convey these tools to 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds, those starting to move out of the house, etc. So it really starts with understanding the history of money. Now, there's a great series on YouTube. It's put together by a gold and silver bug. His name is Mike Maloney. And I strongly suggest, if you are not really knowledgeable about how money comes into existence and the forces that are at work behind the scenes, it's a really good idea to go to YouTube, The Hidden Secrets of Money, and watch that 8-part series. Now, in all honesty, it's put together by a gold and silver bug. So much of what he's driving to with the perils of monetary policy, he's putting the answer to us as gold gold and silver are the answers to these problems. Well, to some degree, that's correct. But you could also put in cryptocurrencies. You could put in a few, well, I guess digital assets, gold and silver, or other precious metals that have scarcity as adverse to the modern monetary policy, which is just expansion of the credit, expansion of the monetary supply, expansion. So that would be number one. Get eyeballs on that hidden secrets of money. You get an understanding of how the history of money and monetary policy is. And with some tweaks here and there, it also applies to Europe, Asia. They're all eerily similar, but have some distinct differences. And you'll find those if you're living in different countries. All it takes is a little bit of digging, and you'll get the answers to those differences. Number two, understanding cycles. Everything is cycles. We have cycles in nature, right? Spring, summer, fall, winter, and then it repeats. The new cycle starts. Well, we have cycles in economies, and it's very important to understand these cycles, right? When you can start to extrapolate the results of cycles, then you can begin to forecast probable outcomes. And as an investor, I want to have the highest probability to the outcomes that I'm putting my money into. And I'm sure you do the same. Let's go. Let's see. And so that's two. Number three, and when Nick gets here, we're going to dive into this. It's going to be a breakdown of some of these cycles, some of the most important cycles to kind of dig your teeth into and start to understand, because they are very deterministic. They have very predictable outcomes. So let's go to the board. I know Brady, the producer extraordinaire, had thrown some stuff on the screen, some of which I caught, but not completely. So I see one here from Bill. Let's go to Bill. I see it first. Question: do you think Brad Garlinghouse was serious about moving Ripple abroad? Well, I think Ripple is serious about expanding their reach. I think Ripple is very serious about expanding their customer base. And I think they're very serious about expanding the use of XRP in their enterprise grade flows. So, does moving abroad solve for roadblocks that are in the system or in this country? Well, possibly. So I don't think that Ripple is necessarily putting out empty threats. I think they've worked out a timetable with their board of directors. They probably have something reasonable like 24 months slated, that if certain, I want to say, categories aren't defined by a national consensus of the regulators that are involved, that, yeah, it's very possible that Ripple would move. Do I think they're going to move sooner than later? No. There's a lot of things we have to factor in here. Ripple moving out of the United States would mean that if they were to go public as a public company to raise the cash to pay off their seed, angel, A, B, C, D round investors, they're going to need to go public or make a shit ton of money. And both could happen, right? But if they want to go public, you want to go public in the United States. It's the largest capital market on the planet. And if your headquarters is in another country and you're not a US-based country, you're not going to IPO in the United States. It's as simple as that. So that's something to consider. There was another great question. I didn't get to it. Let's get to it right here. It looks Jamie XRP. Hey, Jerry, just wanted to pop in and show my support. Well, Jamie, thanks for coming in, man. It's nice to have you. I see Demayan has popped in. I even saw somebody mention Lori. We've got Hairpie or Hair Pie is in the chat, and that's great to see. Oh, Lori is here. Excellent. Tyson KO, right on. Good to have you, bro. Crypto Ice put a comment, but can't stay for the show, so he's going to have to catch it on the replay. All right, well, that's okay. That's cool. Wanted to let you know if there are things, and I appreciate your support, Jamie, by the way. Thank you very much. I often look for ways where I can support a cause or a channel or a person that I believe in, but I can't necessarily fund them. You know, I don't have the financial resources to super chat people and things of that nature. But what I can do is I can watch their material, which adds, creates that ad revenue. I can disperse it and share it. So like if there's a show I really like, I'll tweet it out and I'll post it on Facebook. And the other is I can engage. I can hit the like button. I can hit the dislike button, and I can leave comments. And by doing so, I affect the algorithmic trajectory of that thing. One case in point, there's a young man, well, he's not that young. His name is Scott Powell. You may know him as the XRP Army News. Now, Scott is really got a big heart. He's a great guy, and he's doing this project called Operation Cooperation. And what it is he's dedicating his YouTube channel and all the ad revenue and affiliate revenue that's generated from the channel will go to a basket of charities. And they're charities, I guess, that will accept XRP and that are, through his due diligence, found to be credible, worthy charities. Okay, that's great. And what he's asking, he's not asking the community for financial donations. What he's asking the community for are two things. One, subscribe and watch some content. So if you're spending 2, 3, 4 hours a week watching YouTube content, well, maybe once a week you could watch one of the 10-minute videos and allocate that 10 minutes of your eyeball time to charity. How cool is that? Then he's asking community members to record 5 to 10 minute little video clips, which they're calling the XRP moment in time. Now, I did one. Just saw the Kevin Cage one. Saw one with XRP Joe. Really liked that. I didn't know who XRP Joe was. And watching him and his wife talk about their journey in crypto for 10 minutes was actually pretty cool. And it's a real inclusive kind of thing. So there's a lot of ways that we can support our community without putting our dollars. So, I don't have anything against those that have Patreon groups that supply special content for people. I don't have anything against the YouTube channels that have the little special join, the special part of the channel section. I don't have anything against any of those kind of things. But I think it's great when community members give of themselves truly for the benefit of others. And what I think Scott's doing with XRP Army News and that channel, I think is wonderful with Operation Cooperation. And I hope folks feel the same way I do about the way I'm using this channel's revenue to be able to acquire some cool software and do some professional quality financial literacy content, right? So Nick still isn't here. I want to take a second and say hello to Elipol, P. Kelly. Great to have you guys here. I'm just going to get into this. And when Nick gets off his manager's call, and I'm sure it has something to do with his new employment with Raging Bull, that platform, I want to break it down like this. I talked about understanding the history of money, and I've talked about understanding the role of cycles. Well, as an investor, one of the things that is probably the biggest driver of economies is behavior, right? I think we can all agree on that. However, do we know what's behind behavior? I'd be interested to know what you think. Type in the chat. What do you think is behind? What do you think drives behavior? Something that's measurable. I'll wait a second, take a drink of water, and let you type something in the field. I'll tell you what it is. It's a segment of study called demographics. Demographics. And each and every one of us is a demographic. Let me break it down for you simply like this. Each human being, and it doesn't matter what country you were born, what language you speak, you have basically 6 economic stages. Stage number 1, you're born. Now, with that being born, although the baby is not an economic participant, his parent or her parent, its parent or parents are economic actors. They are now providing sustenance and nutrition for that newborn, clothing, all the stuff, as much or as little as they can afford. They become additional economic actors on the behalf of that baby. Stage number 2, you go through your dependency cycle and get to a point where you actually start working. For some of us, it could have been as early as 10 years old with a lawnmower and some neighbors. And others, you waited till you got to high school and got a work permit and got a job at a restaurant. And for some, you waited till you get out of college. The point is, there is that second stage is when you start working. You start earning money and you start participating in the economy on your own behalf, whether it be to buy your first car, your first bicycle, what have you. You follow me? Number 3 is this period where you actually start to improve. Right? So for a lot of us, when we first entered the workforce and got a job where we received a wage and we paid taxes, we've either were in school, going through school, learned some things, got better at the particular skill that we were learning on the job. We improved and our compensation increased. Then it takes you to a stage. It's called peak output, and it's where you're at the top of your game. You're making the most money you will ever make from compensation. Discounting what you're learning on this channel about investing and all that to the side. So we get to the 5th stage is retirement. And then after retirement, we die. Now, it's important to understand that at each stage of this life cycle, right, our participation in the economy is different. So that's the individual element of demographics. Then there are the wider view version of those demographics, and that are, for instance, if we take a look through here and we look at different periods in time, we'll call them generations like everybody else in the world does, we can define these generations as cohorts or sections and be able to label them. We give them a name. For instance, all those folks that, were in the workforce or just getting out of the workforce or what have you, back in the 20s and 30s, when the Depression happened, that entire generation was called the silent generation. And that silent generation is the generation that went to World War II. They were our combat troops, the support services folks. It was a big, huge deal around the entire world. That silent generation, when the war was over, they came home. Now in the US, they came home to industry. And they started making babies. And they started making money. And they started doing all these things that generations previous to them had not done. And because the actual size of their population was so big, there were so many baby boomers. The population of that generation dwarfed the silent generation. So here we have all these people in these industrial jobs. They're making money. They're buying their first house. They're buying their first car. They're furnishing the home. So they're buying couches and chairs and tables and introduce radio. And then several years later, introduce television. Industry's booming. People are making money and they're consuming. They're buying. Well, if you understand cycles and you can say, okay, what drives, for instance, production? What do you think drives production? I'll wait a second for the comments to catch up. Type in the comment field, what do you think drives production? So, for those of you that were quick to the keyboard, your stuff will pop up here in a minute, but I'll tell you what drives production. It's called consumption. Consumption drives production. And understanding production cycles and how they relate, you always start with consumption cycles. Well, we're lucky in the United States, and there are a lot of other countries that participate in this type of stuff. You can go to websites and get pretty good information, right? One of the big indexes people look at is raw material mining, right? Raw material creation, whether it be plastics or aluminum or steel, right? They're all raw materials that are put together, manipulated, boom. So supply chains and supply chains feed production. Well, it's consumption that creates the demand for production. Well, consumption, what drives consumption? Behavior, fear, or ignorance, or bliss, or positivity, or hope. A lot of things that affect those kind of behaviors, right? So as we go through and start, well, maybe I should have prefaced this whole thing with, it's really this one huge big 3D jigsaw puzzle that you try to understand pieces, get a firm grip on the piece, add the piece to the puzzle, and take the next piece that you're not clear about, try to learn about that, put that in the puzzle, and maybe by the time you die, you'll have the whole thing figured out. But so as I take a look at this quote unquote demographic picture, I want to take a minute and just kind of focus on looking at generations, population sizes, right? If we can determine that the larger the population, the larger the consumption needs of that population will be, right? If you have 10 people, they require X amount of water. If you have 20 people, you require double the water, correct? It's a simple math game. Well, as I take a look at these generations, the silent generation is all but died off. And it's the baby boomers who are all now reaching their retirement age. And they're retiring in record numbers. I mean, thousands a day from the baby boomer generation is retiring. Now, keep in mind, the baby boomers are the ones that lived through industrialism, right? The industrialization. They're the ones that made money. They bought hard assets like property, gold. They even dabbled in, not dabbled, they're actually very heavy into stocks and bonds and these other financial instruments. So, as that huge that cohort, the baby boomers are now all reaching retirement age, they're changing their behavior, right? Some big things, just quickly. They're not buying bigger houses. Matter of fact, they are diverging themselves of larger homes, getting to more manageable homes, if the markets are allowing them to do that. They are getting out of risk-on investments and getting into more secure, safe, fixed income type assets, because their income is now gone. They're no longer in the workforce. So now they need to use their assets to support their lifestyles. Let's go to the next generation. So I said they're not buying houses. Baby boomers aren't buying new cars. Very few are. They've changed their spending habits. They've changed their consumption habits. And what does that do to production? It changes production habits and supply chain habits. All right, let's go to Gen X. Gen X, believe it or not, is a very, very small generation relative to the baby boomers. However, Gen X grew up on television, cable TV. And what happens when you get large cultures centered around television? You're at home. What do you do when you're at home? You make babies. And a lot of babies got made. That's right. I'm talking Barry White. I'm talking wine. I'm talking smooth talk, romantic stuff going on. And the millennials come on the scene. So here we have this Gen X population, which is me and my like, who grew up with spending habits like make as much as you can and spend as much as you can. And if you don't have it and you want it, guess what? Go get credit. So we built credit and we got in debt. Got in debt up to our necks. Why? Well, because it was made easy for us and we were told that was the way. Government mandates, matter of fact, get people to take home loans, get people to take car loans, get people to use credit to buy things. Why? Because when you buy things, quote unquote, consumption, you drive production. And what does production drive? Production drives all the downstream effects of all the materials needed to put into the production machine, but it also creates jobs which create wages. Now we have this millennial generation coming on the scene. They're no longer in high school. They're in school with student loans, or they didn't go to school at all. They're self-teaching. But they, even though they have this huge cohort, right, this large population, their spending habits are completely different than the baby boomers. They're not out buying a home and then 3 years later buying another home. They're not buying a new car and 3 years later buying another car. Matter of fact, a lot of them are still living with their parents. Their goals and aspirations are different. And as an investor, it's so important for me to understand these things so that I can then take this information based from demographics and apply it to things like trends. And that's where digital assets come into play. Digital assets and the technology of distributed ledger technology from the Department of Redundancy department there, sorry folks, is one of these incredible once in a generation innovative things, right? The baby boomers, they had better, faster, more productive cars. They had better, faster, more productive machines in their industrial production mechanisms. And they had better, faster financial instruments in which to allocate money to. Fast forward to the millennials. All those same financial instruments that the baby boomers had access to. I'm talking about bonds that paid an interest rate. I'm talking about companies that actually had revenues and cash flows and had profitability. Yeah, once upon a time, companies were profitable. Anyway, fast forward to now, the millennials are faced with markets that are at all-time record valuations, all-time record debt loads. So therefore that affects cash flows and revenue and profitability. We have record high real estate markets, and we have record low yields on safe, sound credit markets, treasury bills, corporate bonds, right? State municipality bonds, all producing record low yields. So their ability to really profit from these things are really minuscule relative to what the baby boomers got to do and got access to. Enter digital assets. So, we have, this is true, Vet. Lance brings up a good point. Millennials are like 81 to 96. I'll say there's a big difference between 80s babies and 90s. Those born around 94 and later got on social media like in the 5th grade. Right. Yeah, exactly. When I was in 5th grade, we didn't get on anything. I think we got on an Etch-a-Sketch. I think that was the big technological innovation, was the Etch-a-Sketch. I don't know if you remember those guys. You shake them up and it clears and take it down. Forget it. Showing my age here. Anyway, I digress. Let me get back into where I'm going with this. So, if we can assign true value to demographics, where do we get this information? What's a good source of info? Well, in the United States, we have a thing called the census, and that information is public through the U.S. Census Bureau. We also have globally, we have the United Nations does what they call a population database. And you can go, it's free. Just go log on, check out the UN population database. You can get an idea country to country, what the age, medium range age is, how many are in each cohort. So like how many people are from 80 to 60? How many people are 40 to 60? How many people are 35 to 40? How many are 30 to 35? How many are 25 to 30? How many are 8 to 25? How many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And with this information, you can start to extrapolate if you understand demographics, and then you start to factor in behavioral economics, how people in different age groups are going to act or allocate their money, then you can start to build an investment thesis. And the reason why this is important is because over the last 2 weeks, I've kind of done my own little study. And it's just this. I see people make a lot of claims, whether it be on Facebook or Twitter, or even some YouTube stuff, where people are talking about they're absolutely convinced that this particular investment is a really good investment. Now, I'm not here to dissuade anybody from what they think or feel, but I've been asking questions. Why do you think that way? Can you help me understand? Because I'm not seeing it. And it's surprising how that there's really very little foundation in where people are telling me they're getting these convictions from. I'm convinced that this is going to do this. Well, why? Well, because it is. Well, because it isn't an answer. That's not a thesis being expressed. The ability to articulate why and how we believe something is what it is just really basic communication. And it's how we can affect others. Just saying something is going to increase in value with no substantiation behind it is just a claim. It's kind of like one of them down there, and we all have one, right? Okay, so anyway, with that being said, okay, I'm looking over my things. So we talked about demographics. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on the next three, but they're really important to understand. And demographics are behind each and every one of them. All right, business cycles. The cycle of a new business taking on debt, becoming successful, paying off its debt, and moving into profitability. That's an old model of business. The new model of business is get into debt, ramp up, scale up, get into more debt, and then hope that you can scale to such a degree that you can actually start to pay down your debt. But as we've seen over the last 16 years, that model is not working. Companies are issuing record debt. Matter of fact, here's my last caveat on that. There is a new thing in the debt markets. They call it priming. And what priming is here's a company that's heavily in debt, but they don't want to just completely wash out. They're going to issue more debt, but the person who's going to buy that debt for them says, listen, I'm not going to sit behind your bondholders. I'm not going to sit behind your prime stock or Schedule A stock, or even, your common stock, which is kind of the hierarchy of who gets paid if you go belly up. I want to be in the very first position. It'd be like if on your home loan, right, you have a home loan. Some of you have two loans. You have a first position mortgage and then a second mortgage or a home equity line or something like that. Priming is like me coming in and saying, I'll buy debt of your home, but you've got to put me ahead of, I got to be the very first person that gets paid. This is brand new in the debt markets. That's how bad the debt markets have gotten. Anyway, that's the business stuff. So you understand business cycles. Some companies are going to do very well. For instance, Ripple, case in point, not in debt. They have investors, but they're not in debt. And that's huge for cash flows and revenue, profitability, path to profitability. Okay, so that was the business cycle. Try to understand and learn business cycles because they will help you in timing investments. So it's one thing to know the direction. It's another thing to know when to start and stop. How about credit cycles? Well, in the old days, credit was all about expansion, right? You took credit to fund expansion. As your revenues and profits increased, you'd pay down that debt. Nowadays, it's the credit cycle is take out some debt to fund your operations, take out some more debt to pay off the previous debt, then take out some more debt to pay that debt. Then you have to take out more debt just to pay off some of that other debt. This is dangerous. And it was started with governments with a term called deficit spending, spending more than they bring in. Okay? Well, that mentality, that thinking is predominant through corporations now. It's actually very scary. It's very, very scary. Because what happens if they're not getting money from stock sales, right? They stop issuing stock, or they keep issuing stock, but nobody wants to buy it. Well, if they don't have cash flow in revenue to pay off their debt, the people that are holding that debt, they want to get paid. They want their money. Maybe they won't take it in equity. Maybe you have to liquidate your company. These are all things that are going to be coming upon us here pretty soon. There are going to be some great buys for distressed assets here in the next 3 years. You watch. Anyway, that's a story for another video. Let's get to the last one. This is very important, and each and every one of you can relate and understand this and see this. It's the cycle of tax receipts. Tax receipts drive administration, whether they be municipalities in your little city or town, your county, the state, or the nation. In the United States, it's called the federal government. For instance, in Costa Rica, it's the national government. And then each state has its own little thing, just like in the United States, each state has its own little thing. These tax receipts drive a lot of things. They drive roads, they drive salaries, they drive pensions. Well, you can't swing a dead cat without hearing something scary about a federal government or a state or even a city or town's pension plan being underfunded. In other words, it can't pay its obligations. Well, if all or most of the tax receipts that are coming in are going off to pay these obligations, that means new roads aren't being built. That means schools aren't getting improved. They're making cuts instead of adding. What drives tax receipts? Well, homes being purchased, property. And then, of course, the property tax on a yearly basis. The sale of things. You buy a car, you're paying a state tax, you're paying a local tax. You're buying other goods or sometimes services that you pay. Some services are taxed, some aren't. Every state's a little different, but you get the point. Tax receipts are generated through the exchange in the economy. Well, if you look at demographics and you see that younger people aren't buying homes, they're not buying new cars, they're not doing this and they're not doing that like the other previous generations did, then you can start to extrapolate tax receipts are going to suffer. Well, what happens when tax receipts suffer? Things don't get done and things need to get sold instead of things getting bought. I'm speaking directly about the pension plans. Pension plans have mandated liabilities that are usually fixed with incomes that are variable. Variable depending upon the labor rate participation and, of course, tax receipts. So these are things to kind of mull around in your head and get into. Now, as a field of study, it could be kind of dry, but there's some really good content out there, man. As a Real Vision watcher, I'm always watching for stuff from macro guys that are talking about demographics and talking about the impact of these demographics on the broad economy and specific sectors of the economy. Tom Lee from Fundstrat, some of you may remember him. He's got a couple of close to 45-minute videos that walk through a whole demographic behavioral outlook of what to look for in the next 10, 15 years. Really good stuff. So with that being said, it's time to bring in our lady on the street, our young, vibrant investor who always comes with good insights and great questions. Let's welcome in Bitrue Avenue. Bitrue!
Hello. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday.
Let's, hey, Brady, help me out. Go back to the chat or what have you. Is there any, as I rambled on, were there important stuff that it'd be great to get on the screen before Bitrue gets all of my attention? I'll let him go through that. Now, I saw you in the green room for a bit there. What do you think about what I was talking about? Did it go over your head? Was it easily digestible? Did you understand exactly what I was saying? Give me some feedback, because sometimes I'm not sure, because I know what's going on in here, but I'm not always sure if it's coherent coming out here.
No, I understand what you were saying, because I've been following and watching a lot of the videos from Mike Malone, and he's talked about it, had charts on there that were very clear on, the population as far as, where it used to be, like at what age we were productive and all that stuff. So because I watched the video and I've been reading about a lot of that stuff, that made perfect sense to me, because it probably wouldn't have if I hadn't watched it. But at this point, it made perfect sense. Yeah.
Cool.
It would have been really great to know that a long time ago, because it changes your perspective of how things work. You don't realize, not knowing these things, it just changes a lot of stuff. As far as like how you spend, what you're spending on, things to watch out for, and things like that. And seeing it from kind of like zooming out and seeing the bigger picture helps you understand what to do with your, in your day-to-day and in your life. So that was great. Cool.
Well, it looks like Nick made it in. I'm going to bring him in, but Britta, I want to make sure you get ample time on the stage here, because I had asked you in the email that I sent you earlier to come and bring, as an observer of life around you, like a list of things that you're seeing from your perspective and your place on the planet, etc. And I want to make sure that we address that. But let's say hi to Nick. We'll bring Nick into the stream. Obviously, it was not a Zoom management call, because Nick hasn't shaved and he's still in his tank top.
Hi, Nick.
No, it was just a phone call. So most of you guys know, I know Jerry knows, because we talk, because Jerry writes as well, but I also write television and film projects. And I was talking to a guy. Yeah, it was a guy that's in the business. It was just kind of giving me his outlook on the experiences he's had. Bill, what's up, man? So yeah, and anytime you have an industry person kind of spitting out pearls, you don't know what the pearls are, so you just keep listening, and So yeah, it was kind of cool.
So Nick, because you weren't in the green room to hear all this, you were on a call. I'm gonna quickly summarize what I just spent the last 45 minutes on. So I'm gonna give it to you in 2 minutes.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Building a toolbox as an investor must start with fundamental things. So, number one tool in toolbox, understanding the history of money and the current policy surrounding it. As a resource, I spit out Mike Maloney's 8-part series, The Hidden Secrets of Money, suggests that once you get beyond that and you start wanting to get into current policy understanding, Jeff Schneider, George Gammon, Nick Black, Crypto and Coffee. Okay. Number 2 tool in that toolbox would be understanding cycles. And I started it off with this. I said there was basically 5 cycles that people should pay attention to. One is demographics, and I broke down an individual person's cycle of being born, starting work, improving their peak output, their retirement, their death as an individual, and then looking at the overall cohort of their generation, regionally and culturally. Then I got into a business cycle. Businesses start, they take on debt, they become good or they die, they reach profitability, they pay off their debt. Yay. That was the old way. Now the new way is start a business, get into debt, stay alive by taking on more debt to pay off your previous debt. And because debt is so easy to get and it's become cheaper over the decades, you can borrow to pay off what you already borrowed and then borrow some more later to pay off that. Yeah. Okay, that's kind of a business cycle. It used to be growth and consumption and production and, behavioral economics. It's kind of just turned into borrow more to pay off what you already owe. That's kind of the business cycle now. And that's sad. Then I got into actual credit cycles, funding growth, and now funding is just now the status quo. Fund, fund, fund. Scary, but true. And there's a big dichotomy, this huge divide between what some people can borrow at and what most of us can borrow at. And there's a real discrepancy which creates more and more of this, what we call income, the gap of income and inequality. Then I got into the cycle of tax receipts, wages, et cetera, but now let's factor in demographics. Well, the baby boomers, they're changing their behavior. The Gen X is not really much of a generation. It's kind of not even a blurb. And then you got the millennials who are not doing what the baby boomers did. They're not buying a house and then buying a bigger house and then buying a bigger house and buying a car every 3 years. Right. So this is hard stuff to understand, but I wanted to make sure people understood there are resources that are easily available. There's the consensus, U.S. Census Bureau. You've got the UN population database, are things that you can go to and kind of get a feel and a look. And then I brought in Bita, who is now, and the thing I ended with was trends and sentiment. So if you can start to understand demographics and their impact, then you can start to substantiate your thesis for trends and for sentiment. Is that sentiment have value, or is it flighty? Is there meat on that bone, or is it just catching a lot of air on Twitter right now? Those are two different things.
Yeah.
So then I brought in Bita, who was sent off with a mission today to come back as an observer and tell what she's observed in her world as it pertains to what she sees people spending, what the company she works for is allocating their money to, what other companies in her field are allocating money to. And we can start to feed back to Bita how these principles matched with her observational skills can go to create sound investment theses with deterministic probabilities going forward. So it's not a guess. So that she can actually substantiate when somebody asks her, why are you investing in Bitcoin? Her answer won't be, well, because Jerry and Nick think it's a really good idea.
Although that's the best answer.
So Bita, fire what you got on your pad, girl, because I know it's going to be good.
So I think the other thing that we haven't looked at is the cultural differences, right? The way we grew up, buy is not the way we do things in my culture, right? We save a lot. You don't spend something that you don't have the money for. You don't take on credit card debt. So it's a cultural thing that you grew up with. We're a lot more conservative. So when I'm talking about personal spending, I would be talking about the American way of doing things, not necessarily what I see in my family or extended family or my friends, like very close people, because
Understandable.
of the because of the culture we come from. That's just not the way we do things. You always have to have a saving. You always have to have our spending habits are just not the same, right? The things that we value are not the same. We spend, some of the extra money that we have by sending money back home and taking care of family members, even though they're not your, mom and dad. Like if they're your cousin or your cousin's kids, or you have the responsibility to take care of each other. So that's part of your investment because you're taking care of the next generation. So I don't think that's something that's in an American culture necessarily, that we allocate our money to.
It used to be.
So
It used to be.
yeah, right.
But,
And then
yeah.
Also, we tend to build homes back there. So even if you don't build a home in America, you still build a home back home, whether it's for your family or for somebody. So that gets allocated. So that's money that's actually leaving, that you worked for. So that doesn't get accounted for somebody that is from the US. So with that being said, I think a lot of the things that, especially people my age and my generation, what we're spending money on is mostly very, superficial stuff, I guess, like getting a car, for example, like having a newer car. That's something that we do. And a lot of people my age are now buying homes, just because, most of us are now just starting to have kids and things like that. So that's something we look at a lot. And of course, now I'm also starting to look into investments, whether it's the stock or, other investments. So that's something where my money would get allocated to. A lot of people are starting to start a business. A lot of people that I know have started a business, whether, things we talked about in college, things they've been, trying to do or wanted to do, they're now comfortable enough to start doing it. And on a more, on a different side of it, people also spend a lot of money on flashy things. Like they go out a lot, they spend a lot of money drinking, which I used to do. I'm not at that point in my life anymore, but a lot of people still do that. A lot of people still travel. A lot of people are actually more in this generation spend a lot of money in cosmetic surgery, which is something that nobody talks about. But a lot of people are actually getting in debt to get cosmetic surgery, which is because of the social media and the things that we see. That's really what a lot of people are spending their money on. The makeup industry is big, especially as a female in this day and age. We spend a lot of money on makeup, and like the beauty industry, whether it's hair care or, you would be surprised how much money is being spent on hair care and makeup and all that stuff, because the culture has changed. It didn't used to be where, makeup that heavily, or it became like a art and expression. So it just became, part of life. Instead of investing in paintings and artwork, you're actually buying that stuff to make yourself artwork. It's just, part of the
totally
culture
get
because
it.
of social media.
I spend a lot of time and energy on this.
Right. Having peace, right?
A lot of makeup.
Well,
Right. I mean, I was also in the fashion world in college, so I mean, it's I'm around a lot of people that are, in the styling and makeup and all that stuff. So I mean, you'd be surprised how many people actually spend a lot of money on there. So that's on a personal, like on a day-to-day personal, what I see. As far as company is concerned, our company is spending a lot of their energy on actually equipment, as far as replacing equipment, getting better equipment, things like that, cars, because, different I work in construction, so a lot of different crews need, more cars and things like that, or replacing older cars. We also spend money on software, trying to make our operation easier to access from elsewhere because of what has happened, and have a centralized place where anybody can access the files that we need. Everything is on the server now. Everything is on the cloud, things like that. And also real estate. We spend money on real estate as far as buying up the locations that we're at and expanding and things like that. And of course, our competitors are also doing the same thing, which is equipment, cars, and real estate and things like that, trying to expand a little bit. So those are the things that we spend our money on.
Perfect. No, thank you for breaking it down like that. And I'll tell you, one of the things I think it's really important to add into this framework would be when you're taking a look at things that are quote unquote culturally related, or a religious slant related, or even political, they will have impacts in the economy. And the idea is to get a size of what we call the cohort. The cohort would be the amount or the number in the group, the number in the population. I use that term cohort because that's what the rest of the world uses to describe that group. So, your cultural cohort is relatively small relative to other ones, right?
Right.
So assigning a quote unquote percentage or a value to the impact that cohort will have versus the others is important to do. You break these things down. Remember we talked about the 3D puzzle. Once we kind of get a understanding of one piece of that puzzle, we put it in, and there are 5,000 other pieces of the puzzle to try to refine and get better. It's this constant game. Nick, you want to add anything, brother?
I concur. I mean, it's very overwhelming trying to understand finance, and especially since you get bad information from mostly people that don't know themselves. Bankers don't know what they're talking about, but they'll have you believe they do, and they don't want to admit they're wrong, and they might not even know that they don't know anything. But I think if you woke up any banker at 3 a.m. and said, "Explain to me what money is," they couldn't tell you anything. They don't have an answer. I don't know. What's repo? I don't know. Half of them don't even know what repo is. How do you not know what the biggest dollar funding market on the planet Earth is? I'd say 90% of the bankers have heard of it, but they don't even know how it works. Like, what's repo stand for? I don't know. Come and get it? Like, I don't know. So there's so much bad information that I think you have to find a way to simplify it in like the crayons that in the very basic set, like there's 8 crayons, right? Or whatever, like the basic colors. You need to simplify all of finance to like 8 things, right? And as long as you understand just a few things, just at a very basic level, you don't have to know the nuances of how repo works. If you understand that there's this big giant funding market where people trade treasuries, and treasuries are like the top thing. And
collateral,
a lot of times
collateral,
but they'll borrow those things not because they want that one, because they're balancing themselves, a bank or a financial institution or a hedge fund. They're balancing this giant book of assets. And so in repo, it isn't A for B or B for C. It's A, B, X, and 3, and I'm going to trade these 6, and this is going to complete my book for now, today, and then we'll reset and wash, rinse, repeat tomorrow. And all of these banks and financial institutions, they dip in and out to manage their book. And so this is a very fluid thing. That's all you really need to know about repo. Sometimes some of the collateral gets gummed up with crappy collateral called rehypothecation. That's all you really need to know, is that something can look really good, and when you flip it over, it's got a chain attached to a ball of dirt and hair. You're like, oh, that's not a treasury. I thought it was. Yeah. So, that's all you really need to know. How do what do you need to know about the Fed? Nothing. You don't need to know anything about the Fed. they never do anything. It's called an equity policy, where they say they're going to do something and they expect the rest of us to behave as if they've done it, and then they get the result that they talked about. They don't actually do anything. So you don't really need to learn anything about the Fed. They create fake money on fake balance sheets that sometimes gets used, but mostly it doesn't. So, and this is how it works. Understanding equity markets is pretty simple. You're trading imaginary shares of companies that don't actually equal ownership. Equity is not ownership. They'll make you think it is. If I own some Apple, I can't go take a brick out of Cupertino and put it in my back pocket. That's my, I own that much Apple. That brick is mine. No, people that have equity or shares, that is the lowest rung of ownership in a company. The highest is corporate debt. And the closer you are to the company, the more likely you are to get paid in some kind of awful event or some kind of insolvency or something.
Unless that company has been affected with this new quote unquote, have you heard about priming? Priming in the debt market? Meaning companies can come, like say your corporation is GE, right? And you're already in debt up to your friggin' neck. You need to take on more debt. Well, a company comes in and says, you know what, I'll buy some of these bonds from you, but we got to work it through a priming contract. I'm going to be first position.
Oh, yeah. The Leon Black model. So if you want to,
oh my God, it's insane. Yeah. I want to throw something on top of what you said.
Sure.
Where do we get our information? And I found this this incredible thing on Twitter where here's the advertisement. There's a conference of some sort, World Economic Forum or IMF or whatever it is, next week.
Creeps are. Yeah.
Next week, the financial gurus, the heads of banks, the heads of state are going to be listening. And Jay Powell is going to give a talk on digital currencies.
Crypto. Yeah.
Can you believe that? A guy that does not really know and understand these things.
He doesn't understand his own.
Talking about it.
Yeah, he doesn't have his own house in order, so that's going to be interesting. But they do need to address something. I mean, if just to go down the rabbit hole for a second, there is a huge problem with stablecoins,
right?
And the huge problem is it's the exact same problem as the Eurodollar system, which completely got out of hand, which dispelled the need for a gold standard, which is why there will never be a gold standard, because it's muted. There's no point. And that is that outside the United States, it doesn't matter what the Fed does. It doesn't matter what the Treasury does inside the United States. Because outside the United States, they can originate dollar-denominated loans, and there's no reserve requirements for these banks. That dollar funding market is bigger than the internal dollar funding market. So you have the US dollar, and then you have the euro dollar market, which is the externally created, not to be confused with the euro currency. Well, the same thing is happening with stable coins. And, let's look at Tether, which we know is not collateralized, right? We know there's not $15 billion spread out in a bunch of accounts. Why? Because all of those dirt bags are running from the cops right now, right? They've all been indicted. And the only one who hasn't been indicted yet is Brock Pierce, and give it some time. And so the problem is the governments that are going to digital currencies, they're not going to allow private companies with really no reporting requirements to just spin up US dollars out of thin air. What do you think the Chinese are going to do when no company in China is going to spin out DCEPs, digital yuan, because they're going to frog march you to prison forever, right? And so
a digital version of an equivalent to a yuan.
Yeah.
Like what we call stablecoin.
Yeah, they're never going to allow that. And I think every country is going to get around it and say, yeah. We can't have a bunch of printing presses, virtual printing presses, because that's what they are. Because no one knows, none of them are capitalized. Probably still better capitalized than fiat currencies. But central banks and printing facilities don't want to compete with me and Jerry and Bitta creating a Jerry USD tomorrow and spinning up 6 trillion of them. We could. And we could say they're collateralized, and they'd say, well, how? I'll say, well, they just are.
They are, and we're self-insured.
Yeah, self-insured. We got you. Don't worry. You're SAFU. Your funds are safe. And so that's a problem. And so I think there's going to be a war on, because that's the one thing that they can clamp down on, at least inside the United States. What's the other problem? Well, outside the United States, you can't stop other countries and other jurisdictions, companies in those jurisdictions, from spinning up dollar stable coins. So this exact same problem that we have with the euro dollar system is the exact same problem that we're going to have with stable coins. So really all they can go after, they can only go after companies that do business in the United States with United States citizens that they can lock up.
But there'll be other other G7 jurisdictions that start playing the same game that the U.S. is playing. Don't think for a second the UK won't come in.
Oh, I think
for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. Eventually, all the G20 will say, "Okay, listen, wait, what? Hey.
I agree.
We understand a free market, and we understand these assets that stand alone and go up and down with markets and all that. Okay, great. We got that. We understand that." But this whole currency thing based off you're creating your own private currency on a global stage. We're not going to allow it in our jurisdiction. Well, the more it's just like network effect. The more jurisdictions that say that, the network effect clampdown will just squash those things, and it will literally be musical chairs. If you're holding stable coins, I've got my stable coin on Nexo and I'm getting 8%. Well, guess what, buddy? If you're the U.S. and the U.S. clamps that shit down, you're getting 8% of nothing.
Well, and that's the thing. Everybody should ask themselves if they're getting a return on investment or a return on asset. Because any of these platforms that can return to you 10, 20, 30% in a coin, you go, wait a minute. There's no platform on generates that profit. So, and there's no high yield. High yield debt's 5%. And that's the riskiest debt in the world right now. So you're telling me that some rando platform with their SUSD can pay you 30% a year? You go, where the F does that money come from? Well, they just print more of the token. So anytime they're offering you more than 1 or 2%, that they are zero capitalized. It's all funny money. And so, and I think I think everybody, like Jerry said, they're going to sing Kumbaya. All the governments are going to get together and they're going to clamp down on stable coins, and then they're going to clamp down on privacy tokens. Because they can at least have the argument, okay, Bitcoin escaped, but the real crime is done with Monero and Zcash and Dash and all. That's where people go to the dark net to buy missiles and pornography and drugs and all. You're like, okay. So, and most people will buy into that argument. Matter of fact, I don't mind the privacy coins. I don't really care, right? I'm not in crypto because I think I'm being clever and secret. I'm in crypto because I don't trust fiat currency, right? But there's a big difference. I'm not saying I'm doing illicit stuff. I'm going to hide in Bitcoin. Well, that's the dumbest thing ever. They can see everything you do. And even if you go mix your coins and do all this kind of privacy stuff, eventually some clever AI is going to unwind all of this, and there's going to be a very clear and complete copy of everything. You're not going to escape anyone. You're not going to escape the tax man or escape some kind of criminal prosecution forever. They're going to eventually data mine every transaction that's ever happened. Some AI will do it in 45 seconds, 5 years from now. And then they'll come knocking on your door and go, hey, tax evasion, whatever. So, but I think in that, as we move forward and clean out this space, the stable coins and the privacy coins probably get kicked right in the right.
Well, let me ask you this, because I think you've always got good insights. So what I wanted to ask you is, in the framework, right, looking through the lens of how you build an investment strategy, tell me, in the world, how big of a part does looking at demographics and behavioral economics play in your development of a thesis or a strategy?
So it's like the third thing that I look at, but it's definitely important. It's part of this kind of rolling idea that I've been developing, not just me, that a lot of people have been developing. Essentially, it's like there are things that are necessary but not sufficient to make a trade, or necessary but not sufficient to make an investment. And so there's many layers. One is the macro gears, like we talked about briefly. You have to understand just the basic plumbing of the system. That is beneath the foundation. You understand, how to buy and sell stock in the crypto space, how to get on an exchange, just the very basic plumbing. How does this work? How does money move from a central bank to a bank out into the world? How is money created? Just the really basic stuff. Boom. Okay, then over the top of that, you need to have a basic understanding of the psychology of people. How do people behave in certain markets at just a real basic level? Okay, and again, you don't need to be a genius on any of this stuff. Just a basic understanding. So you have your framework, you know how the plumbing works. Then you understand the basics of how people work, and that'll let you start to take your ideas and convert them into trades. But those are all necessary things, but they're not enough, right? Those aren't sufficient. Then you layer on things like demographics and business cycles. And I think those kind of go together. Matter of fact, they dovetail really well.
They do.
And so if you understand the basics of business cycles, like you were saying, businesses might buy debt, or they might and go into the debt market, so they may never tap the debt market, whatever. However, they grow to the position of greatest incompetence. Either they grow so big they get divided, or they grow so big that they sputter out, or they grow so big that the people at the top cheat because sociopaths rise to the top, and that's the corporate structure. But whatever the case is, there's a veneer of psychology on that, and then you have to start looking at, okay, this group is getting older. This group is going to start selling their homes. This group, for instance, the boomers, they have on average about $150,000. Only it takes them about $40,000 at a minimum, $40,000 a year to exist, meaning they have less than 4 years of money saved up, even with their retirement, before they're going to be in real trouble. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to sell those big homes. Only, let's look at another demographic problem. The millennials aren't buying second homes. There's some of them not even buying first home. They moved in with mom, right? So there's no buyer for those there's no buyer for the baby boomers' homes. So who's going to buy those big homes? Well, developers and banks are only going to invest in so many of those things, and that's going to leave a glut. And then that's going to fall on the market. And so at some point, we're going to feel that. Now, right now, we have this demand surge where people are like, I'm getting out of the city. Okay, cool. There's a little bit of fleeing. And so there's a lot of building going on outside the city. And everybody's like, yeah, the market's back. But that's a very transitive effect that will be mitigated pretty soon. And then what you're left with is tons of businesses going bankrupt, tons of delinquencies, banks with lower and lower interest rates not being able to make any money, borrowing short and lending long, and just getting punished. And the closer we go to zero, the less banks can do that, the less cooperative they are to us, the harder it is for the millennial to get the loan for the house that they can't afford.
Right, because credit standards.
Anyway. Yeah, right. And if you were to ignore all of those demographic effects, those big waves, look at Japan. America's kind of like this. Japan is like this, meaning there's all these people exiting the system, and the inflow is very tiny because they're not having. There's more elderly than younger. It needs to be a funnel like this, or even like this, because what happens is if the people at the top, the ones that are becoming net takers, net users,
and not consumers,
they stop contributing, and what happens is this is the only inflow of capital, and it's supposed to support all of this. It's impossible, and so you have what you have in Japan. You have 30 years of chaos. And all this stuff, by the way, all of this stuff that we're trying, speaking of demographics, you can look at Japan. Whenever you're talking about, I wonder if this QE6 will work, we already know it won't. Well, one, there was 5 of them and they didn't work. Number 6 is not special. And also, by the way, knock, 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 they've been fucking doing it in Japan for 30 years. And it's done. And at the very least, they've been aggressively doing it for 8 years. And we've seen it. I mean, solid. They've done everything we're trying to do. And they don't have the horrible net investment imbalance that we have, where we own less of external entities than they own property and assets in the United States, that net international investment position. And so it's just like, but again, if you don't look at the demographics, you're only seeing 2/3 of that pie, right? So it's, again, that's another necessary but not quite sufficient. But when you look at them all together, then you start to get this picture, and then it becomes with all that information, who's the best speculator? Because we're all still guessing. There is no to get this right. It's just making really good inferences. And if you infer better, and if you're, I would say, it sounds bad to say better, but if you're a better critical thinker than your peers, you don't have to be the super smart person, but you have to be better than your peers, then you will make statistically better decisions over time. And as you make statistically better decisions, those rewards are income, and you start to leave your peers. And I think that's what you do. But we're all guessing that no one knows. Otherwise, there'd be one asshole with all the money.
Right. And speaking of that, it is the one asshole with all the money is, no, I'm just kidding. I'm looking at the clock. It's time to bring in my producer extraordinaire. I'm going to invite Nick and Bitta to hang out in the green room for a quick after show conversation. But I do want to bring in the man on the street, and I believe this is the one, Brady.
Oh, this man.
Brady. Final thoughts on this just absolutely thought-provoking show that we did tonight.
I would say, as crypto investors, it's our duty to communicate through the comments. In whatever stuff we consume, whatever things we're learning, I think the more we draw algorithmic attention to it, as you were pointing out earlier, the better we'll all be, because it'll attract other people that are trying to figure out the same, or are asking themselves the same questions, looking for answers that apply to them or more tools.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this toolbox macro mashup it's the start of a good beginning, because we need to learn these things. If we don't, we're going to give it back, and no one wants to do that.
Or we'll just tread water.
And that's the cool thing too. Learn how to do things, figure out the options market, what can you do there? Learn about macro. It doesn't necessarily need to involve crypto, but once you do start getting those 10%, and you are thinking along Nick's line and thinking, all right, 20%, take it off, keep it moving, that makes then the next bear market bearable, because you're prepared for it.
And there'll be a next bear market because you've studied cycles. And there's going to be a summer, there's going to be a spring, a winter, and a fall.
It will keep rhyming over and over and over again.
Brady, thank you so very much. Hey, hang out in the green room, bro. I'll be right there. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. I want to just again let you know how much I absolutely appreciate all the support for this channel. It's not enough to have a couple of YouTubers talk about this stuff. The whole point is that we raise the financial literacy for the entire space, which means each and every one of us get a little bit better about articulating these concepts and ideas. And we will only get better at that if we are sharing and exchanging with each other. If we keep it all in the cabeza, who knows how it's going to come out with the habla, in the words, in the palabras. So I want to thank you for tuning in. It was absolutely wonderful having you. I saw a couple of names that I feel are brand new to the show, like Kat Lyra. I have not seen you before. Dawit's Creative Studio, thank you so much for joining. You're a new name to me. And of course, Steven and Hunjan and Stephen Kurt and all the folks that were previously mentioned, thanks for joining us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all live next Friday right here on Market Conversations. So until next time, Pura Vida.